The Listening Tube presents Not the Headlines Extra.
I'm Bob Woodley from The Listening Tube. There's been some news about youth with confusion about their gender recently, and the good news is that some of the confusion from the adults when it comes to gender confusion among our kids has been corrected. Both decisions happened at the federal level of government. Some would argue that the government shouldn't have anything to do with it, that these decisions should be made between the patient and the doctor. But there are reasons to both support that stance and reject it. The difference is whether or not the patient is under or over the age of 18. If you're under 18, then your parents have a say-so when it comes to all sorts of decisions, whether the kids like it or not. If you're over 18 in the United States of America, then you can do whatever the hell you want, as long as you don't hurt anybody else. That probably sounds like common sense to most of us, but that wasn't the case in California when it came to a teacher or school's freedom to inform a parent of their child's desire to keep secrets about their sexuality from their parents. Not their sexual activity, but their sexual identity. California maintains that teachers should be able to keep secret a student's request to be recognized as someone of the opposite gender than they are, or if the child requested to be called by different pronouns or a name different than their birth name. Full disclosure, my name is Robert, but my teachers mostly called me Bob. They didn't call me Roberta or Bobby, and if they had, that would have certainly drawn some attention. Sadly, it might not today. By the way, today, only beautiful women call me Robert. But when I was a kid in school, my only hope was that the teacher wouldn't call my name at all. The point is that if Robert suddenly wants to be called Roberta, then the parents should know. The problem was that in California, teachers weren't allowed to tell the parents. A judge just changed all that. U.S. District Judge Roger Benitez more or less declared that the rights of parents outweigh any proclaimed responsibility of the state as proclaimed by the state. CourthouseNews.com quotes the judge as saying, California's public school system parental exclusion policies place a communication barrier between parents and teachers. The state defendants are, in essence, asking this court to limit and restrict a common sense and legally sound description by the United States Supreme Court of parental rights. While this law applies only to California public schools, what has yet to be determined is California's policy of accepting any child claiming gender dysphoria from any state and granting asylum to the child and blocking notification of the child's parents regardless of their home state. What California calls protection of trans kids is being cock-blocked by the executive branch of the federal government as well. In addition to the U.S. District Judge ruling that parents have a right to know if their children are claiming to have doubts about their gender, U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. recently declared a battle on hospitals that perform gender treatments and surgeries for children. Now you might be thinking, come on, Bob, just say sex change operations. Here's the thing. You might be familiar with the trans advocate term gender affirming, but the Health and Human Services website has a different name for it, and it's the literal opposite of what the liberals call it. Sex rejecting. Get it? Not gender affirming, but sex rejecting. Neither description is entirely accurate, but sex rejecting deserves as much credit for being contradictory as gender affirming deserves for being misleading. Gender does not need to be affirmed, nor does sex need to be rejected.
Similar, but different.
In any case, Secretary Kennedy says kids should not be subjected to irreversible procedures when it comes to transforming their bodies into something other than they are. That seems to make sense, considering we don't let kids drive cars or drink alcohol or vote. We're not old enough to make those kinds of decisions. We can't be held responsible for what we do at such a tender age when it comes to responsibility for our actions. Thank goodness. Nor should we be allowed to determine what parts of our bodies will be altered or removed in a permanent way. By the way, nearly 20 attorneys general from states around the country and one governor, the governor of Pennsylvania, filed a lawsuit challenging the Secretary's directive against gender surgery and procedures on children. Look, once you're a legal adult, do whatever the hell you want. Secretary Kennedy is looking out for the kids who are being misled by the premise that we get to choose our gender. We don't. That's not to say that you can't be gay. That's not to say that you can't dress up in women's clothes or men's clothes, depending upon what it is you're trying to accomplish. That's not to say you can't have sex with any consenting adult you want. When I was a young man, I knew other young men who found each other more attractive than they did young women. I never had a problem with that. I figured it was just less competition for the young women. I have no problem with gay or transsexual or any other letters in the conglomeration. But when it comes to children being subjected to the choice of gender, that's just something to be avoided, as it serves no purpose and accomplishes nothing for the individual. There can only be one reason for transgender advocacy for children: the medical and insurance industries. That's why the left supports the transgender philosophy. The insurance and medical industries are some of the biggest contributors to the Democrats. The medical and insurance industries have the most to gain by advocating for trans treatments for kids. They get them on puberty blockers early, then perform the surgery that ensures the patient will need medical assistance for the rest of their lives. Not to mention mental health treatment, which will be paid for by government health care if the socialist Democrats have their way. Let's face it, it's the insurance companies and the medical companies and the way they've taken advantage of our government that has caused the inflation we have. The Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, has cost the American citizens billions of dollars with little return. The transgender kids issue has opened the door to looking at all of the ways liberal policies have robbed the people of their money and their dignity. It's just not right to tell a child they're in the wrong body and make the rest of us pay to change it. Luckily, there's a judge in California and a cabinet secretary in Washington, D.C. who are taking measures to prevent our children from being used as guinea pigs for some progressive social experiment aimed at dismantling American values. When I was a kid, the local TV stations would pose the question, "It is now 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?" Today, you could consider asking that question at any random time, as the likelihood of a child getting into trouble is just as much at noon as it is at 11 p.m. And when it comes to knowing where they are, the geographical location might be the least of your concerns. I'm Bob Woodley from the Listening Tube.
Get a lot more content from the Listening Tube with Bob Woodley podcast.